In this video, we're going to take a look at the Versatube Building Systems garage kit, and we're going to talk about the whole process from ordering to assembly to the design and the final results. This is not a video that's endorsed by Versatube. I fully paid for this thing myself. I did all the work except installing the garage door on it, and as you'll see, some of the things I have to say about this are going to be pretty critical. This is where it all begins, the Versatube website. And if you've looked around at building kits on the internet, you'll notice that their website is far and above the flashiest and the best, and I do give them credit for making a good website. It's really what sold me on the product. Unfortunately, the product, well, you'll see. So, on the website, their killer feature here is that you can design it yourself, and I mean, look at all this marketing stuff. Slip it together, it's like building Legos. It's strong, just unpack the box, has everything you're going to need, American steel, yeah. I mean, it looks pretty convincing. So, I'll go up here to the kits and design your own. And I'll go to the garages and buildings. I'll just walk you through what I designed here, what you're going to see. Here's the building designer that I filled in with the specs of the building that we're going to look at. So it's a 12 by 20 by 8 frontier style, the sideways panels with the 8 by 7 garage door opening in the front, and it's brown on the sides and gray on the roof. I also checked the premium delivery option, which is pretty much essential because unless you have a forklift, you're not unloading these bundles from the trucks. So this means that the truck comes with an attached forklift and they unload it where you want it. So if we look at the sheet metal, you can see that I checked this upgraded 26 gauge R panel box, and I paid the extra to get the R panel sheets, which have these larger ribs compared to the conventional sheeting, which has very small ribs. Now, as we'll see, this is a bad decision because I really don't think that they have done their engineering using these panels. So the kit you get is going to have problems. And you'll see why. It has to do with the panel spacing with the ribs, because you'll notice the difference in the ribs on a regular panel and on the R panel. It's got a 20-year warranty. You push the button, you fill in a few things, get your credit card, and with a discount it was around $4,000 out the door. So all in all, very slick website, very nice design. Everything I spec'd here did come in the building. There isn't really a huge amount of things that you can do to mess it up, and they do call you to verify before your order goes through. So now we've seen the website, let's go talk outside about what the real building actually looks like. After the order process, you get two things. One is the instruction that you'll get by email, and the other one is the actual delivery of the parts of the building. So the parts of the building come as 2 pallets on different trucks, different times. One is going to be the siding metal, and the other one is the framing metal. And they had promised me that the framing metal would come first, but unfortunately it did not. The siding came first. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was inconvenient as it prevented them from putting the frame closest to the building structure, since I had to have the pallet dropped with the siding metal closer to the building. But anyway, it wasn't a huge deal. And one of the things I discovered during that process was that they're not actually from the same company. Turns out that Versatube produces the frames only. The siding metal comes from a different vendor, whoever's local to you, that provides regular metal roofing components. This isn't a huge deal, but it does affect what they're able to do with the metal components before they're shipped to you. And as we'll see, that makes a big difference in how the installation of this building actually goes. Let's take a look at the instructions here. I printed them out and put them in these plastic sheet protectors in the binder. They just come as a file that's emailed to you. There's also a small pamphlet that's included with the building, but I wouldn't recommend using it. I would recommend doing this. So it starts off looks pretty good. You've got a full listing of the frame components and the hardware, and they have drawings of the frame, Some of these could be dimensioned better in places. They're not fully dimensioned and it's kind of annoying. But they do basically show, and they are specific to your building. So they show pretty much everything you need to know for the frame. Now, the siding is a different story. This is all you get for the siding. There is no specific drawings on where the siding pieces go or how they fit. So the instructions that follow, this is all generic now. That's the only part that's specific to the building. These drawings are all specific to every building that they make. They're not only for yours. So they're all written in very general terms, and there's far too many words and not enough actual diagrams and pictures that really help you. It's really wordy, and I mean, look at the size of these paragraphs. They're crazy. So I really didn't like the instructions at all, and there's a lot of things that they leave out, gloss over, or otherwise could explain and don't. And we'll talk about that more as I talk about specific components, but suffice to say that the instructions are not great, and if you haven't done this before, it's going to take some measuring. I mean, the general concepts are all very easy. It's all the specifics of how exactly things should be installed, how many screws they should get, where the screws should go. That there's generic diagrams or explanations, but there's not a full showing of how that should be done for your building. I would have liked to have seen these kind of drawings for the siding as well. Now we'll start with going through the assembly one step at a time. So the first step of assembly is putting the frame together, and it starts by putting the base rail here on the floor. So essentially you slot these sections together, and they have seams in there, and you just slot the pieces together, attach them with screws, and then bolt them down to the floor by drilling in these anchors. Now the one problem I had with this is that these holes for the anchor bolts, they're not very well made. They're just punched through the metal. And if you look closely, you can see that the metal is deformed where they punched it. That's not from me tightening the bolt. And this is because I guess it's cheaper just to punch straight through. Well, it might be cheap and it might make a hole, but it also deforms the tubing. And when you deform the tubing, it makes things not so straight anymore. And when you have these punched holes near where the connectors are, it starts to pull things out of alignment, and it also makes the side of the base rail bulge out so that it doesn't have a perfectly flat edge. So when you want to put a level or a string line to try and find out if this whole rail is straight, it now has a bunch of bulges where these holes are punched. So I really didn't like that. I would have much rather have seen them drill the holes neatly or put a piece of insert inside the tubing when they punched it so it didn't crush down as much. And that really comes into play later when you start putting the trusses together. So truss assembly was actually fairly straightforward without many problems. The only issue was some of the tubing had little bent ends on it, which you just straighten out with a pair of pliers. So all you do is lay out the truss pieces, straighten them out, and put the screws into these plates, which have a lot of screws. So you're really going to need a good drill to put this together. And once the trusses are assembled, you just slot them down into the base rail. And this is when you start to find out why those little differences in the rail makes a difference, because that any difference in the true angle of that base rail is going to affect how straight the trusses are. I'll put some pictures in here, but I had to use a lot of ratchet straps and a whole lot of effort to get everything lined up and squared up and true before I was able to put the hat channel on the top of the building, which is what connects the trusses together. Now, one thing you'll notice about the roof here is that there's only 2 sections of hat channel. And each one of these sections of hat channel is only attached to the frame with 2 screws at each attachment point. And you'll further notice that the hat channel at the end of the roof here is not even attached to the main framing. It's attached to this stamped bracket that is attached to the end of this to even out the rounded corner. Now, it is a nice mandrel bent corner, I'll give them that. And actually overall the frame is of pretty high quality. It's all mandrel bent, and it does fit together reasonably well aside from what I mentioned about the base rail. But the roof attachment is kind of lacking in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of this only having 2 hat channels for the whole roof span. Because you only have 4 screws here holding the roof onto that support. So if you look at the whole building, there's a ton of screws you're supposed to install on the edge of this roof, and you can see how many there are. But there's only 2 screws at the end here holding that to that sheet metal bracket. So I don't really understand the engineering behind that and why you could get away with that few screws after telling me I have to put this many screws in the roof. And actually you can see on this side, in later steps you have to climb on the roof. And I chose specifically to add this wood in here because the roof was not strong enough for me to climb on safely. I didn't feel comfortable climbing up there until I added some extra support because the whole roof panel is unsupported except at the ends. So we'll get more into the roof, but that's just on the framing here. You can see that I wasn't very happy with that. I would like to have seen another piece of hat channel here and some L brackets securing the hat channel to the frame members more directly. But this is supposed to be loaded, you know, snow load rated and everything, so we'll see how it holds up. I don't think it's going to collapse, but it doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy after seeing how strong every other part of the frame is and how many screws there are and all these plates, that they only have 2 screws really holding the roof on at each point. Now we'll talk about starting with the siding installation. So the siding panels, you start with the sides and you start from the top. So this is the optional R panel, which has the bigger ribs on it. And I thought this was going to be nice because it would be a stronger, beefier material. The problem is that this building, I really don't think anyone did the engineering on this, and this is probably the biggest issue I have with the structure. That they have made some serious errors in the sizing of these buildings versus the sizing of the gaps between the panels. So this side of this building has 3 sections. They're not 3 full sections, they're 3-foot panels, and it's an 8-foot high building. So the bottom panel, as designed, when you get to the bottom, the last rib should be here against the ground. So when you cut this panel to fit, this rib is going to be cut here and going against the ground, which is impossible to seal and impossible to make it cut in. So what I actually had to do was cut this shorter and get a sheet metal brake and make my own aluminum filler pieces to use against the ground, because there was no way to make this fit the way that they designed it. It's an absolute design omission. With the sidewalls accomplished, you'll see the back and the front have the same problem with the panel alignment, so I had to make the same strips at the bottom. And now when you get to the top, these panels are shipped with a square cut. You'll quickly find that all the pieces for this building are not cut to size. The frame is a kit, the siding is not. The siding is basically a material supply. You're getting pieces that are cut to length only, square cuts for length only. There is no angles, there's nothing else cut. So you have to cut all these pieces that go along the top edge of the building at this angle. And at this point, you don't have the roof or anything as a reference. So when you do this, you have to try and draw an imaginary line between that hat channel to get everything to be cut at the right place. This takes a lot of taking things up and down and fitting them and careful work. And another problem was that this top piece is not long enough. When you cut it, you'll see there's a seam here. And at that seam, I had to make an extra piece to fill in, because if you didn't, you could see a gap after the trim was installed. So that's another design flaw. That piece needed to be like a foot longer, this top piece, because remember, they're cut to length only. So you get a full width piece of siding that's 3 feet long or whatever, and you have to do all the other cutting, which is tricky when you're trying to cut small pieces with a circular saw with a metal cutting blade on it. It's all very time consuming. Let's look at the front garage door opening. All this trim you see has to go on first. And this trim, once again, is not pre-cut. It all comes as full lengths that you have to cut and trim to fit everywhere on the building. It's hard to see now with the garage door trim. I'll try to edit some photos in. But this secondary trim that goes under here is another design flaw, because it does not actually have the right profile. So you see that this gap here is nice and closed up. But originally, if you assemble this the way it's delivered, there's a huge gap here. And the reason for that is that this inner trim has a folded over edge for no apparent reason. So when you put these two trims together, it's like being on a rocking horse. It doesn't sit flat. So I had to go and cut all those edges off by scoring and breaking them on a brake. After that, these panels are cut to width, but you have to cut the garage door opening out of this upper panel, and then make another small filler panel up at the top, just as with the back. And this means you have to cut a piece, so this is all one piece from here, all the way around the door and down on the other side. So you have to cut that opening out, which is a whole nother measurement challenge, because you can't just slip it in either. You have to raise the whole panel up over the J-channel trim and then drop it in. And then you've got to do the same finishing at the top. After you've got this wall panels erected, you have to put these corner trims and the top trims on. Again, none of this is cut to size. You have to cut it, including the angles of the roof and everything else. I quickly discovered, though, that the way these seal, they have a piece of foam in here. And this foam is adhesive and you glue it in there. Well, they shipped me the wrong foam. If you look at this is foam for the small panel, not the R panel, the conventional, and you see it doesn't line up at all. So I lost like another week waiting for them to ship me a replacement, which they did, but I had to wait for it. And it was just a complete error on their part. There's no reason to ship me this stuff, and I'm still stuck with it. I don't know what the hell to do with it. Once I got the right closure strips, there's reasonably able to install these corner pieces. Again, making sure to seal up the bottom corners here, because another issue is that there is not really much weather sealing here at the bottom. In their drawings, they talk about building a siding edge on the slab, but it's ridiculous. Who's going to build a slab that only covers the building size and not any bigger? Who wants dirt right outside their building? So this whole bottom, I still have a few spots that need to be recaulked, because when it rains hard, water will come in underneath. They really haven't addressed properly the way of sealing this against the foundation. And I don't want water coming in, because eventually it's going to cause the metal to rust. These tubes of the base frame are actually open at the ends. So there's nothing really stopping water from getting down inside them if it comes in past the siding. And you can see this piece here is the extra aluminum that I added at the bottom to make a finished edge, because cutting the panel in the middle of a rib and then ending up with a piece like this just doesn't make any sense. But all in all, I got this accomplished and put together, and now we can move on to the roof. So when we go onto the roof, you'll notice that these trims at the end have to cover, and I'll put some pictures in for a better view. So the manual, and another critical omission, tells you to start this end of the roof here, right here, even with the frame, and it is. Well, when you do that, you'll notice that now there's a gap on the trim. So here's the trim, and it's past this space. Well, when you get to the other end of the roof, and you don't know this till you get to the other end of the roof, it doesn't fit, because now the trim is not big enough. I had to actually cut and split this trim and add a piece of aluminum over the top of it to cover this gap. The only other alternative was to take the entire roof off and redo it. So another lacking part of the manual that caused a severe amount of extra work for me. Not very happy with that at all. They should have much better explained it, and the trim could have been better designed. And you can see that the trim is basically open in there. So if we go around on the inside, you can see that that end of the trim is just open to the world. They have a foam filler strip that goes into the roof panels here, but there's nothing at that gap underneath. So that's basically open. Water doesn't come in, but certainly bugs and insects can. I don't know yet if it's going to be an issue or if I'll have to seal it, but there is no included way of sealing up that gap. Let's talk about the finishing touches. Garage door is not provided by them. You have to get your own. This is a Clopay door, and I had it installed because it wasn't that expensive, and I was tired of working on this thing. And you can see that it's just a straight up install. Use some angle brackets to assemble the track onto the frame, and secure the track directly to the front frame of the building here. So it's nothing really complicated about the garage door installation. One thing I would say though is when you install this trim, they tell you to put screws in it, but they're all in the way of putting garage door trim on, so don't bother and let your trim just get put on and put the screws in later. Again, another glaring oversight in the instructions. All in all, I think it's going to be an okay building. I mean, it is here and it seems robust enough. I'm just really dissatisfied with the overall construction process, and truthfully, how little of this is really a kit. The frame is definitely a kit. It comes, it has drawings, you put it together, you screw it in, and you're done. All of the siding is essentially a do-it-yourself project. It comes cut to length, but there is no other cuts made. You have to cut all these angles, you have to cut all the trim, you have to fit all the trim, you have to make trim to make up for their lack of design on the outside of the building. The whole building could have been an inch or two taller or shorter to compensate and it would have been fine, but instead they chose to just not check and not care, and then you stuck with this. I was lucky that I had a friend who had an aluminum brake I was able to borrow, and that was an additional cost in materials and labor to do that. And I think the biggest issue was the roof with this trim problem, because they completely failed in the instructions in telling you that this overlap edge here should be lined up with the end of the building. It shouldn't have. It should have been lined up another inch forward. And had I done that, I would have saved myself all kinds of work when I got to this end, making these other trim pieces, and having to come up with a way of dealing with that. You can also see up on the roof now, I got the ridge cap. The ridge cap was pretty straightforward. The hardest part is just climbing on the roof to do it. I would highly recommend that you get a scaffold when you build this thing. It is going to be almost impossible with ladders. These sheets of metal are big and heavy and awkward, and it's very easy to get pulled off a ladder. So all in all, I would not recommend this building. I really don't think that they've done their homework, and I really don't think that it's enough of a kit to make it worth, the way that they sell it. When you look at their website and you look at all the promises and how easy it looks, this, is just really not a kit. It's their dirty secret is that essentially they're a frame supplier. When you look at their, what they actually do as a company, they provide the frames. They don't provide the exterior metal. They just order it from a supplier like you would order if you're putting on a house or anything else. And those suppliers only do straight cuts. They don't do anything fancy. So they don't have the in-house capability to come out and make their own pieces that are pre-cut to size and everything. And really that's what would have made this a much better project, would have been if it had pre-cut pieces. Because getting, 10 or 12 foot sticks of trim and 8-foot panels and having to work with them, or 10-foot panels having to work with them, is just not nearly as easy as it should be when it's supposed to be a kit.